Misha Euceph, have you ever been fired from a job?
Yes, I have been fired.
Really?
I've been fired a couple of times from jobs, actually. I'm the queen of being fired.
No way. So tell me about the first one. Or what was the worst one?
Oh, I mean, I can tell you about all of them.
Okay.
I don't mind sharing. Actually, I've been wanting to share this forever.
Oh, good.
Because, you know, when you first get fired and you don't have enough clout in your industry, you don't want to talk about having been fired. But then when you have made it a certain distance from that, you want other people to know it's okay to get fired.
Right.
The first one was I worked at a marketing company that was kind of like a giant con job, and I didn't realize like that what they were doing was selling, you know, credit cards and loans to people, and I was doing copywriting for them, and when I applied for the job, I knew I was going to go to grad school. I had gotten into grad school. I knew the date, but the pay was really good. It was going to be my first full-time salary job. And I just decided, okay, like I'll do it and see what happens. And at some point, I just emotionally checked out because it was not fulfilling at all. And they noticed and they didn't want to keep paying me. And they were like, well, you know, you're not really meeting your goals. Like, we're going to fire you.
Oh.
And they gave me a couple weeks. That was like
That's
courteous.
nice.
Yeah. But it worked out because I was going to give my notice in a couple weeks anyway. So
Right.
that was a very gentle one. And then I was fired from my first serious job in audio because I started making my own podcast on the side.
Ah.
And I, again, was not fulfilled at work. And in that case, I really kind of stopped showing up to work and like was just doing my own thing and making money from it, and was maybe a little too defiant. And they had met with me a couple times before, but that was one of those where they escorted me out of the building. I mean, I didn't like throw a tantrum or anything, but it was very corporate, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I am being like walked out, and I have to like gather my belongings, and it was just, I mean, it was one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because then I full blown, you know, started focusing on my independent podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually something that I want to talk to you about later on, because you talk about failing and that kind of thing, and we'll get into it in a minute, but it was very inspirational the way that you talk about it.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I am not the only one in this room, even though my boyfriend, producer, and co-host Scott Slaughter is surfing in Mexico. Oh, hi, hun, wherever you are. But we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about Misha Euceph. So Jay Connor held an event last year called An Extraordinary Evening for Podcasters of Color. Shout out, as always, to the homie Jay Connor. He's always doing the most to create spaces for people of color in the world of podcasting. There were three beautiful panelists, Amber J. Phillips of Black Joy Mixtape, Euceph of Locatora Radio, and Misha Euceph of Tell Them I Am. And after the panel finished, all the panelists were mobbed, and the line from Misha was like out the door. And Scotty was like, we need her on the show. But the line was so long. So then I nabbed you at another event later on, and I was like, I'm not letting you go because you're why I'm here. I'm here to find you. And we got you booked, and I was so excited. And then you had kind of a string of unfortunate events. And one of them was what do you want to talk about a little bit, what happened? And because we had a date for you. And then we got a text with you laid out with a seat collar on in a hospital bed.
Yeah, I got hit by a car as a pedestrian right outside of work. And it's funny because I was sending that photo to everybody that I had plans with just to prove, like, this is not an excuse.
Right.
Like, I actually got hit by a car.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how gruesome or shocking it might be to some people until later.
Yeah.
But in my own adrenaline rush, which lasted for weeks, I was just like, oh, this is a totally appropriate thing to do. Just send everybody a photo and say, like, got hit by a car, here's proof. I was walking outside of work, and an elderly man lost control of his car, and
You were in the crosswalk.
I was in the crosswalk.
Yeah.
I had the right of way. It was the white man telling me to walk, and the hand wasn't even flashing yet, so we're like totally in the green. And I, heard screeching and screaming, looked up and saw this car on the sidewalk that was accelerating towards me, and I realized I was not going to be able to get out of the way in time. And I tried. I like a goalie, you make a split-second decision. I went to the right, and the car hit me head on.
Ugh.
And I held on to the hood from what I can remember because I didn't want to be bounced up because I was worried my head was going to hit the ground and I would have some kind of head injury. So, fell to
That's
the
a good
ground.
bet, too.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I was so surprised at how smart I was.
Yeah, in that moment.
Yeah, it's just like I think most people have those reactions in
Yeah.
an accident or in a crisis, and it's such an animal part of you,
Yeah.
you know. But ended up coming out of it alive, not unscathed. I have a pretty serious ACL injury. I have surgery coming up in January, so it'll be a recovery process. But just grateful to be alive.
Yeah, I mean, you look fantastic. You look unscathed, and
Thank you.
Do you have PTSD from that? Do you? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's showing up in ways that I had no idea. I'm not stressed out about crossing the street. I don't have any problems driving really, but when other pedestrians are crossing and I'm driving, I get almost crippling anxiety.
Yeah.
It's a lot of sleepless nights. Like I feel like I still have adrenaline pumping through my veins. Like I can't really sleep.
Right.
And I haven't been able to sleep since the day of the accident.
How long ago was that?
It was on September 11th.
Oh, that's
Of
right.
all the days.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, 3 months ago now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's unimaginable to
Yeah.
me. I have heard more people being in close calls from that kind of thing. I have not known anybody who's been hit in a car, like a mistake like that, where they jump the sidewalk, and I mean, to be hit head on. I would imagine that brake screeching and that kind of thing also.
The
would
sounds,
be, the sounds, yeah.
The sound. There's a couple things that stick with me. Like the sounds stick with me.
Yeah.
So whenever I hear brake screeching, that's so spot on. And also when I think back to that moment, the feeling of the car hitting the front of my face.
Yeah.
I will never forget that. Every time I think about it, I feel the whole thing all over again.
Amazing.
Which is, it's just like, I can't even imagine being, somebody who's like a soldier or a veteran or somebody who's dealt with much bigger, more long-lasting trauma.
Yeah.
Because even this is just doesn't leave you.
Yeah, but when you're a soldier in a war zone or a battlefield, you're prepared for that. You walking in the crosswalk with the light, there's no way you could have been prepared for that.
That's true.
So that inability to brace has to have something to do with it. You know?
Yeah. It was one of the most fateful moments I've ever experienced in my life. I've never looked up at something physical or external and been like, oh, that's fate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is going to happen right now.
Well, we are really fortunate to have you. I'm so excited that you answered my email, and because I just really, really wanted you on the show. And
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going to get into why I wanted you here so badly right now, because I'm going to introduce you. So Misha Euceph is a Pakistani-American podcast host and producer. Her most recent show, Tell Them I Am, is about the small defining moments in our lives. The voices are all Muslim, the stories are universal. One of my favorite taglines ever. I love that. She also produced The Big One, Your Survival Guide. This is an amazing podcast, by the way. If you don't know The Big One, it is really a survival guide. It's been called riveting and strangely reassuring by The New Yorker, and the LA Times called it sugary in a good way. All this podcasting started with Beginner, right? Her autobiographical series about learning to belong as an immigrant in America. It was featured on NPR and Wired. She got her master's in journalism at Northwestern University in Medill. Writes for McSweeney's and the Wall Street Journal. And I'm saying it like that because I'm looking at you to make sure everything's right. And if you want to make a podcast, you should read How to Make a Podcast, which she says she wrote for you. She also taught podcasting at Transcom and is an adjunct professor at USC's Annenberg. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
All correct.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah. And you
So
look,
braggy.
Yeah, you look like you're 17. I know you're not, but you do. You look really young.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I know, I get mistaken for like a high schooler all the time. It is not good for credibility at all.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, it'll be good later on, trust me. You'll enjoy that.
It's my mom's genes. I'm really thankful. Really
thanks,
thankful.
Mom.
Yeah.
So we talked about your only one in the room statement, and we had said that you could say, I am the only one in the room who...
I'm the only one in the room who refuses to be tokenized. Good.
Beautiful. Okay, so you said in all the stuff that I read and listened to that you were the kind of person that you would call a thinker when you were younger. Is that correct? And you had a story about wanting to fix everything in your life, including the tension in your car. I love this story. Your mother was overhydrated. Was she always overhydrated?
Oh, my mom has a water addiction.
Okay.
And there are other people in the world too,
Right.
who have this. I've now learned.
Yeah. Well,
Not the only one.
You can be overhydrated and die from it too. Did you know that?
Oh, no. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I don't think she's that overhydrated.
So will you tell me that story? Because it was the tension between your parents, right? In the car because your mom drank too much water and you're driving.
Yeah. I mean, so my one of the memories I remember from my childhood, and it's funny because my parents' relationship has so changed from that, and that's kind of a beautiful evolution. But I think in the early years of their marriage, my mom would always be drinking tons of water, and we would get in the car and drive somewhere, and she'd always have to pee.
Yeah.
And my dad was just like so furious about this and like could not come to terms with the fact that she always had to pee, and would make such a stink out of like having to stop the car and going to a bathroom, and she would make such a stink about him making a stink. And I remember just as a kid being like, oh, well, we've got to avoid that problem, so can't drink any water, and if we do, I have to like really learn to hold it. And it's one of my, most prized skills to date. Like I can hold my pee for a really long time and not, have some sort of crazy disease or problem result from it.
That's a really useful skill.
It
actually.
is on like long road trips,
Yeah.
or if you're stuck in airport traffic and you really have to pee and you can't get out of the car. Like there's some good situations where it comes in handy.
But what I got from it though is that you realized that somewhere when you were looking back at your life that you wanted to fix everything. Like that was kind of like you weren't okay until you could figure it out at least, right?
I would say less fixing everything and more it was probably the beginnings of like becoming a thoughtful person.
Okay.
I've come to understand the world in a binary, which I know you're not supposed to do anymore, but I do think that there are careless people and there are thoughtful people. And that was probably the start of me recognizing my environment and trying to see, okay, what impact do I have on it and how do I control that? And I think some of that is like the undue burden of like being a person of color or being a woman or being the first child or whatever, being an immigrant. But I think some of that does make you a better human.
Yeah.
Because you recognize the space that you should occupy, right?
Yes.
And I think privilege is the opposite of that. Privilege is the ability to be careless, or the luxury to be careless.
Ooh,
you know?
Yes.
And that was one of those first moments that I started to kind of like understand those things. So I think yes, of course, like I wanted to fix everything, and I've really learned to let go of that and perfectionist tendencies. But I think it's even deeper and more rooted than that.
Yeah, I love that. So you were born in Karachi, Pakistan. You moved here when you were...
Like 11 and a half, almost 12.
Okay. So you moved into middle school here.
Sixth grade.
Yeah. That's a tough place to enter. And you grew up speaking English. Did you have an accent?
I did. I had
did.
an accent, and I remember there was a kid who sat behind me in my language arts class. I think his name was Chris something, had freckles, and he would kind of just literally poke, and then poke fun at me, and imitate me, and he also made fun of my teeth, which I ended up getting braces, and now you can't tell. But those two things, I was like, oh, gotta fix these things. And it's funny that you said the fixer thing, because I guess it's another one of those examples. But my sister and I both started consciously practicing an American accent, and I remember when we first started to dream in English instead of in Urdu.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, I'm thinking in English. I'm in the shower and I'm not thinking in Urdu anymore. Mm-hmm. That is so weird.
That's really weird. Do you still speak it?
Oh, yeah, fluently.
Yeah.
I mean, and I have a strong relationship with Urdu poetry and Urdu literature.
Yes.
And it's not something I wear on my sleeve or that's readily apparent, partly because I don't have an accent and don't present as super Pakistani. But I really treasure
super
the language.
Sorry. I just saw that image. But no, keep going.
Yeah, no, it's getting rid of the accent was a conscious thing, for sure. Yeah.
So what was your middle school like? Was it predominantly white?
It was, so I grew up in Palos Verdes, which is nearby. It's a upper middle class, mostly white and mostly Asian neighborhood. It is stunning, master planned. There's a huge Japanese population. But even the Asian people that I grew up with were very whitewashed.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I grew up in a really white environment. And there were some Iranians and Indians, no Pakistanis initially that we knew or that I made friends with outside of my parents and their community. Mm-hmm. It was a character building experience.
Well, how was it? How was it coming into that environment? So there were other Asian people, but they were maybe born here or had
been here for multiple
so you were first generation here.
Straight up immigrant. Yeah.
And so how was that? What was that experience like for you?
It was interesting. I think that's one of the things that I would not change about myself. I loved that I went through that, and that I had to kind of become a social chameleon. And learn to watch people's expressions. Okay, this is how you act when you're doing this, and this is how you talk, and this is the tone of someone's voice, and this is the fork you're supposed to be using, and this is how you sit at a table. All of those things I really, really learned because it was such a brutal environment. There was really no acceptance for being different and being yourself. There was no such thing as natural hair in 2003, And I was wearing my hair natural, so nobody was excited about that. You were automatically a loser.
Wait, how was their hair?
Oh, everyone had straight hair.
Straight hair.
Most people had highlights. A lot of blonde women. Yeah. And this is close to the beach. Beach aesthetic is reigns supreme. The men were either blonde or dirty blonde or brunette or whatever, and all wearing Vans and the same shorts and the same socks that go up halfway to their calves. And style in Palos Verdes still has not changed. People still dress exactly the same.
All those beach communities.
Oh my God. Yeah, girls wearing shorts and Uggs. It's what are you, in a sweatshirt? It makes no sense, but it's still fashionable there.
Yes.
But I think it made me understand how to transcend identity and hold on to it at the same time. I really had to whitewash myself, but to some extent, whitewashing myself did make me more accessible and makes it easier for me to say things that I think other people in my community wouldn't be able to, or would be received in a more villainistic way,
Like what? Like what kind of thing?
I think I can just... I can talk about being culturally Muslim, and I could even make jokes about terrorists or whatever. And those are two different things, but I think I am taken seriously or non-threateningly in some ways.
They can laugh with you.
They can laugh with me,
Yeah.
although they're laughing at me. And they can say things to me, you know, that I know there's a discomfort with other people. And I've been experiencing more and more of this recently, and I've been trying to think of like, well, why am I like this? Why is this okay in my presence and not someone else's presence? And I think some of it does go back to learning so many of these like habits and behaviors and presenting in a certain way, you know?
Well, and it does it because I have done, I've had a very different path than you, but I've done a lot of the same things. And being able, it's code switching for me, which means that in white communities, I can speak and act and talk the way that everybody else does. And when I'm in black communities, I speak like I normally do and act like I normally do, or authentically do. And I don't even know what's authentic anymore because I've done both for so long that there are two halves of me. Maybe they're equal now, but
yeah, that's really interesting. Being in a career where like your voice matters and is kind of everything, I started to notice that like my authentic voice literally comes from like a deeper part of my body, and that's when I knew I wasn't acting or like putting on a show or performing. And when I'm like talking like this, like from my mouth, it's like more of a show.
I love that.
And I've had to think about that really consciously and try to. Me too.
No, but I feel that.
Yeah.
I totally feel that. That's really interesting.
And there's something about being a woman of color and having a deeper voice that like I've had to accept and like own. And that if you listen to beginner, to the big one, to Tell Them I Am, you'll hear that change in voice and timbre and tone, and you'll hear me sound more like me right now, but that's for me been a gauge of like, when am I presenting and when am I myself?
Wow. So I don't want to spend too much time in high school, but I think it was those Asian women that you talked about that you finally kind of clicked in with. Is that correct?
No. My first real friend was a woman named Rebecca, where she is or how she is. I hope she's well. But she was Iranian, and she and I became friends in middle school, and then I decided that I needed to have a white friend. And so then I became friends.
You cast one?
Yeah, I was like, I gotta have one. Like, never gonna move up the social ladder if I don't have a white friend.
Right.
So I became friends with this girl, Alex Palmer, who now goes by Lexi Bose because she's married and older. And she was my first real friend. And she was, into horse racing and part of the equestrian team and club and
all the right stuff.
Yeah. And she was not like part of the mainstream cool crowd or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, the Asian girls was when I realized, I can be cool too, because they're not white, but they're still cool. So there's something that they're doing that I can also do, to fit in.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of validating because there's the idea that there's a way to be popular without being that. Popular, I don't even know if that was your goal, was popular, but...
At the time, I think probably, yeah.
Or fitting in, or
both? I think it was both. I think it was like, at first it was like fitting in, and then it was like, well, now I fit in, so what's next?
Did you become popular?
No, never.
No.
Oh. In the traditional sense, no. Yeah. But like, it stopped mattering,
You said that you ate lunch by yourself in the bathroom when you first got here. Is that right?
In 6th grade. Yeah. Before, this was pre-Rebecca Barazian.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is it because you were scared to eat in the cafeteria? You were scared of not being accepted out there?
I just didn't know what to expect. Like, I didn't know where I'm supposed to sit or who I'm supposed to be friends with. And it was still in my, like, observational phase, just watching everybody and seeing, like, what is this all about? Of course I was scared.
Yeah.
I just didn't know what to do.
I sit on this diversity, inclusion, and equity committee at this independent school, And I hear so many stories about people eating lunch in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I think there just should be some kind of accommodation made, like little tables in there.
Got a little sanitary.
Right. Well, just because it's people go in there because of what you just said, because they don't know where to sit, or it's too overwhelming. Sometimes people go in there because their lunch looks and smells different than everybody else's, and that's a
interesting.
cultural thing.
Yeah, I never thought about that. That's really, yeah.
Sometimes there's a language barrier, where or an accent that might be so it's interesting how we find those ways to cope. You have to be in school, you have to be in class, but you don't have to be at lunch, so you can disappear for that hour and maybe just recharge too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what are you guys doing about that?
About people eating lunch in the
Yeah.
bathroom? We have committees. We have affinity groups. We try to make an affinity group for every group that's in the school. They do lunchtime. So, it can fall into segregation that
Yeah.
way. But we have affinity groups, or we have diversity club, which is everybody, and they do a lunch there. We also have buddies for people when they come in, and we really try to be thoughtful about how we match them, not directly with someone who's exactly like them, but someone who maybe has a similar culture, or who came in new, who also had an accent, even though it was a different accent, or whatever it might be. And so they can kind of introduce them into the culture of the school.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's more to be done.
Yeah.
There's more to be done. This whole next year is about the LGBTQ community.
Mm.
And non-binary and transgender, and making private changing spaces in locker rooms, teaching faculty how to use correct pronouns, or pronouns that allow for everybody. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a school that's been there since 1933.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a change for a school that's been there for.
It's a huge change.
Yeah. And what are the demographics?
It's mainly white.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. This is
Yeah.
going to be interesting.
It's a private school in Los Angeles. It's expensive.
Mostly liberal, I assume.
Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
In
LA. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you a couple of things. So I'm really jealous. No, let me
Please
finish
don't
up.
be. I'm jealous of you.
You've got the Midas touch in podcasting, because beginners, tell them I am, big one, they're all so major, so well respected, so well reviewed. I try to retweet every time you're on a best of list, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, she's on another one. Okay, I'm retweeting that, because I'm so proud of you, and I'm so I don't know, proud of you is that sounds condescending.
No, you can be proud of
but
me.
I'm inspired by you, But like I said, you look like you're 17. I know you're not. Do you feel like you're young to have had all the success you've had in podcasting?
Yes, and I also feel like timing-wise, I have been fortunate that I got into it at the right time. Because, all of these things were timing,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not taking credit for it, but even something as simple as getting interested in podcasting before Serial came out, and deciding to pursue a career in radio before Serial came out.
Right.
And then
everything is before or after, right?
Yeah.
The Serial podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And choosing to, it wasn't even choosing to release Beginner. I didn't know what I was doing. So it was taking me so long to make everything that by the time I got Beginner out, the trailer, Donald Trump was being inaugurated. And it made the story relevant in a way that it was just kind of a random project that I was going to do before, That timing was not me. Coming out to LA before LA podcasting was a scene.
Right.
To some extent, I will take credit that I was like, no, you can make it from anywhere. If you're good, you'll make it from anywhere. You'll get attention. But then to be lucky enough to meet the people that I met, like Arwen Nix and James Kim and Mary Knopf. These are heavyweights. You have to remember their names. They will continue to define the course of this industry, And for us to have met at this somewhat unknown public radio station. I mean, KBCC is known in LA and in California, but nationally, it doesn't have the recognition that, let's say, Wondery or NPR has or Gimlet has. And for us all to have taken a chance and seen something in each other, I do feel really fortunate. Like, I don't feel like any of it was accidental, and I feel really lucky to be the vehicle through which it is happening,
Yeah. Well, I respect that. And, I applaud your humility in that as well. I mean, you're pretty amazing. And when I saw you on the stage at Extraordinary Evening for Podcasters of Color, I mean, to me, you stood out for so many reasons, but again, because I was sitting there in that audience, and we just launched this podcast in April of 2019. I knew nothing about podcasting before coming in, and you had me like wanting to go make another podcast. Like, I should start something else now, because you were so inspiring, and you were like, you can do this. Like, whatever it is, these are the steps you're going to take, and you're going to make this happen. Don't let anybody tell you different. And I just haven't heard anybody say that in this industry. It seems like people in podcasting are very, it's really hard, and these are the challenges, and it feels like there's a lot of negative energy around getting into it and making yourself discoverable and all that. And you just were so energetically excited about what you were doing.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I love the craft of it. And I want more people to make good stuff. So I have more stuff to listen to and like recommend to friends.
Yeah.
And I can't see, if you are a truly creative person, then your goal is to be the most you possible. Right? And how could that be competitive with anybody?
Right. Yeah.
Like, how could that possibly hurt? Like, how could it hurt you to help someone else? It just doesn't. And I don't know. I get a lot of validation from helping other people and from being excited and saying you can do it. And if it can uplift other people, like, you don't know when someone will uplift you in return.
Yeah.
And it's such a reciprocal thing. It creates such a community around your work to help other people and to uplift other people. That is kind of selfish, actually. It's just like, I'll do more work if more people are excited,
Is that why you wrote what is it called? How to Podcast? No.
How to Make a Podcast.
How to Make a Podcast, yeah. Is that why you did that?
I mean, that was multiple reasons. One, I really wanted to write a book. And I was like, well, I'll get a book deal if I make a cool website.
Yeah.
And in writing it, I realized, maybe this shouldn't really be a book. This is actually perfect in this form. And maybe the book I want to write is something entirely different. But I also was getting a lot of emails from a lot of people, and I want to be helpful to all of them, and I do not have the bandwidth to give personalized advice to every single person.
Right.
So I wrote this because, it just came out of me, and I was working on the big one, and I was really, really stressed out at work. And this kind of became this weird outlet on the side. Yeah. And it was so easy. It was so easy to just put all that out there because it was just knowledge that had been swirling around that had existed in multiple emails to multiple young podcasters over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's served me in a way because it makes my job a lot easier as a mentor to people. I don't have to do as much of the, actual legwork, and still can be helpful.
Yeah. Yes, and you should download that if you haven't. I have. It's great. It's really great. It's really useful, and it's so cool that all that knowledge is in that one document, just for anybody who wants. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for checking it out.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was doing my research.
I know, you're so well. The questions you're asking me, I'm like, oh my God. I need to up my game as an interviewer.
I want to talk to you a little bit about being Muslim. So I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but pre 9/11, that was 2001. Is that right? Black people were kind of public enemy number one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I were with a group of people who were not black, I would be the one who was going to get stopped or profiled or questioned. After 9/11, it seemed like there was a split, and brown people who skewed Muslim looking got some of that heat that we used to get all of. And I know that was like you were really, really, were you born then? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm not that young. No, I moved here in 2003.
Right. But have you felt the impact of that?
You know, it's interesting. It's so much of it goes back even with discrimination. I didn't realize I was being discriminated against when I was being discriminated against.
Tell me about that.
Well, for one, my dad always was like, don't play the race card. Like, don't ever play the race card. Like, we're going to be hardworking immigrants. And, like, we're going to get everything on merit. And it's so funny just to see how, like, that has evolved publicly, but also privately within, like, our family and how that's changed. But some of it was purposely whitewashing myself to avoid that and to not be grouped as a Muslim right off the bat. I didn't want to be Pakistani first or Muslim first. I wanted to be Misha first, you know?
Yeah.
But I think some of that was like from my dad. And I think it was also just this blindness to what discrimination actually is. Like, I thought that it was going to be like somebody, yanking my hair or like punching me or yelling something.
Like violent.
Yeah, violent, whether verbal or physical.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that it could be a look or a laugh or... Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it could be a look or a laugh or, just a gesture. Or even like who people choose to hang out with versus who they don't, or what they assume you must think, the questions that they ask you when they first meet you. Right? Like, when I first moved here, people were asking, like, did you have electricity in Pakistan? And did you live in a hut? And did you, why don't you wear a hijab? Just, like, questions that assumed so much that seemed to be coming from, like, the popular narrative put out in the news. And a lot of it in response to the war on terror and Islamophobia and all of that stuff. So now when I look back, I'm like, oh, that was discrimination.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've never worn a hijab?
No.
Your family does not?
It's just like not even in the, it's so far removed. It's so funny because I think people think like, oh, that's a question that like every Muslim woman must consider. And it's like, no, like some families, it doesn't ever come up.
Right.
Is
it more of like a cultural thing rather than a religious thing, or no?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a thing that has grown in popularity over time. And I think some of it is because of immigrants coming out here and holding on more dearly to their religion, because it's an easier form of your identity to hold on to. I think some people want to be more visibly Muslim. And I think some people do come from more conservative, devout families, and it's all of that. But I find it really interesting because when I lived in Pakistan, I didn't know a single hijabi. I didn't even see them on the street.
Hijabi is the word for someone who wears a hijab?
Yes.
Okay.
And so when I moved here and met a lot of people who were wearing a hijab or choosing to wear a hijab, or their children wearing hijabs, and it was such a conscious and popular choice and a form of empowerment for so many people, I was really surprised. And to me, it felt like it came more from Arab culture than it did from South Asian culture. And maybe in America, where Muslims blend together a little bit more, we have maybe picked up on each other's cultural, religious practices. And maybe that's where it comes from.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. We were going to talk about more about that, probably off the podcast, because I have more questions. But first I want to get to the real reason why I chased you down and made you come on the show. But first, I want to talk about Tell Them I Am a little bit, because First of all, I love the title as you explained it. And it's a parable, or it's a story from...
It's from the Bible.
It's from the
Yeah.
Bible.
Old
And
Testament.
it's... Can you tell it really quick?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm going to butcher it.
No, so I'm obsessed with religious texts. I studied philosophy in college. That is like my secret passion that will come out in more projects as I continue to put out stuff in the next couple of years. But one of the stories that I read in the Bible when I was 16 years old was about Moses and his incident when he encounters the burning bush,
Right.
when he's in exile from Egypt. And he supposedly has an encounter with God, and he asks God, like, who am I to go free my people from Egypt? And God says, well, I am with you. And he's like, well, who should I say sent me? And God responds with this, like, really weird answer. And it's the word Yahweh, which means I am, or I am who I am, or I am, I was, I will be. And it's not a name,
Right.
and we human beings have turned it into a name. But that response to me is so beautiful because it's an entity that is refusing to be categorized. And if we as humans if you're a spiritual or religious person, if we're made in the likeness of God, then we don't really, or in the image of God, right? We don't need to be categorized either. Like, isn't that like the thing to
Yes.
aspire to?
Yeah.
And it just stuck with me. And it made me understand God in a different way, and divinity and spirituality in a different way. But it also really, really spoke to the struggle of being a person who is constantly being categorized, which I think every human being is, and not wanting to just be defined by one thing, right? Not wanting to be defined as just a woman, or just a pretty woman,
Right.
or a white person, or a brown person, or a gay person, but instead wanting to be all of those things.
Yeah.
And feeling free in doing that. And that phrase, tell them I am,
Yes.
I think it makes the whole thing deeper, It made all the stories a little bit deeper, and it had a rooting in something that was bigger than just the people who were telling their stories.
I love it. You told it exactly the way you did on the podcast, so thank you for that. And I really did.
Memorized it by now.
Yeah, I pulled over when I heard that and had to absorb that because, I don't think people are happy until they can categorize you. I think it makes people really uncomfortable until they can pigeonhole you. Scott, my boyfriend, and I aren't married. People are uncomfortable with that. They want to be able to say, well, when are you going to get married, or why aren't you married? And then, once they have that answer, then they can go on about their day.
Yeah.
But without it, it's a source of dis-ease,
Well, and I think they probably want to know, like, oh, okay, is this okay for me?
Right.
Like, what does your
Yeah.
not being married say about my life, right? And if I
Yeah.
can categorize you, I can understand my life a little bit better.
Right.
But I think there's something amazing in surrendering to the inability to categorize, because then you also have to have humility and know that you can't know.
Yes.
Even
Yes.
about yourself, that you
Yeah.
may surprise yourself at points.
Right.
And you may not know whether, like, your relationship is solid.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
the category doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
So Maz Jobrani, who is a comedian, and so I'm going to read this now. He has a bit about a Muslim baker at, like, one of his...
Yep, from his Axis of Evil comedy tour.
Right. And so that was kind of the inspiration for this, how you created the show, right?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the things that really stuck with me, the idea of showing Muslims just as people. And he uses this joke where this was very close to 9/11, right after I had moved, where he talks about, well, once in a while, like, can't CNN just show a Muslim baking a cookie?
Right.
Instead of, like, every time it's like this terrorist attack and this terrorist, you know?
Right. Because we bake cookies too.
We bake cookies too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, this is Muhammad, he's in Iran, and he's just baking a cookie. Like, nothing to see here. And it stuck with me. It was like a childhood experience of watching that with my parents and my best friend, and I started to think about it more deeply, and I was like, oh, like there's a way to show a Muslim baking a cookie.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just took it as a call to action.
And hence the stories are universal, and the voices are Muslim. Right?
And they're tiny, tiny stories, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, like, one of them, someone gets stung by 100 bees, and that's the story.
Yeah.
Like, that it's not about moments that are like, you know, and I mean, they're not all hit the car moments.
Yeah.
Like, or got hit by a car.
There's a couple that
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. Some of them are just like kind of delightful stories.
Yeah.
So here's the real reason that I wanted you on was because you told this incredible story that I really hope you could tell.
Which story are we talking about?
It's about how I'm unclear on what they were asking you to do exactly, but it's about the Twitter call to action. Can you talk about that? You can't. Damn.
I mean, I can.
Yeah?
I can.
Okay.
Let me just think about
Yeah.
how to phrase this.
Because it's such a good story.
Yeah, I just won't be able to give you specifics.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's just do, okay,
Yeah.
let's try it.
Try
yeah.
another setup for it then. So
Yeah.
It's a little.
Yeah.
So let's see. Without getting into specifics, can you talk about the story you told to me and a few other people at Extraordinary Evening Podcasters of Color about fighting for your show?
Yeah, so I think when you're making a show with a specific audience in mind, and you know, when you're making a show with a specific audience in mind, and people who may be in charge of certain aspects of the show, or might, you know, have traditionally had say over what can and cannot go in the show, are not that audience.
Yes.
It creates an interesting tension. And in the experience of making Tell Them I Am, there were a lot of questions about numbers and whether it was hitting the numbers that, you know, we wanted it to hit right off the bat. Eventually the show gained a lot of traction, made a lot of best of lists, and pulled its weight. But at the beginning, right, when we're releasing it mid-Ramadan, one episode every single day, one of the questions that came up was whether people might be confused when they tune into the podcast, and whether we should explain at the top of the show what the show is about. So maybe repeat that tagline that the stories are universal, the voices are all Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a petty fight to fight, but when I did an interview with NPR for their religion series, Carrie Miller said something really, really interesting, and she was like, the secret weapon of this show is that someone can be listening and forget that the person they're listening to is a Muslim. And I did not want to lose that. And that was the original premise of the show, is you can be listening and you can fall in love with someone and forget that they're Muslim, and by the time that you remember, you're already in love with them.
Right.
But if I'm reminding you at the top of every single episode, even if I'm saying the stories are all universal and the voices are Muslim, that has a connotation. That's going to stick with you. That's the discrimination that we're trying to fight by putting out these stories. Mm-hmm. And so I really had to stick my neck out for that. And it was really difficult to explain it to certain people in certain positions of power, that this show is not for you. And that, no, like, my integrity is on the line. I am not going to put this disclaimer on here.
Right.
And I think it was seen in some ways as like a petty battle to fight. And I you know, I still stand by it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, truly inspirational to me. I think I've told that story. I told it to you. I told it to a bunch of different people, because it's like you don't know that you can do that. You know, if you are fortunate enough to be, you know, where you have an audience and a platform, like, people don't know that they can fight for their integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and still be on that platform and still have that audience.
Yeah.
And that's what I heard you do and say.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
and I have very rarely pulled a race card in my life.
Yeah.
But this was one of those occasions where I was like, what you're asking me to do can be interpreted as racist.
Yeah.
And I urge you to think twice about what you're asking me to do, because this is not as small as it seems, you know.
I have a quote that I pulled off Twitter. Can I read it?
Yeah.
It says, "Tell Them I Am is not a show about the Muslim experience or Muslim identity. It's a show about defining moments and stories as told, it's a show about defining moments and the stories are told only by only Muslims, the way stories on Heavyweight or At This American Life are told by white people, and they're not about the white experience." I just thought that was really powerful because it really reframes the way you think about it, or the way I thought about it anyway. And it reminded me, I have another quote that's not yours, it's Toni Morrison's. And this is to Charlie Rose during that kind of infamous interview. And she says, "You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? You could never ask a white author, are you going to write about black people? Whether he did or she did or not. The inquiry comes from a position of being in the center." And I just felt that those were parallel statements, that being in the center, you can make that statement when you're in the center, but when you're to the right or the left, you know, you have to point it out to the person in the center that this isn't okay for you to say right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also this assumption that just because you have an identity or identify as something, that everything that you say now speaks to that identity.
Yes.
That's tokenization, right? That's like, oh, okay, like you're a woman and you get mad when you're PMSing, therefore all women get mad when they're PMSing. No, I get mad when I'm PMSing. And
Do
this
not
is
generalize.
just this is just about me. And I had to come to terms with the show over and over again too, and constantly. I mean, my team was keeping me in check, who I adore. I can't say enough good things about. Arwen Nix, Mary Knopf, James Kim, incredible humans who really got the point of the show.
Yeah.
And at times had to remind me and be like, hey, no, you're tokenizing. Hey, we shouldn't, you know, frame it this way.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible thing when you can work with people who get your vision and then are willing to challenge you on your vision and hold you accountable. And it's a hard thing to remember.
It is.
You know?
I have one more quote of yours, and then we're going to go into the Dear Laura segment. Let's see. This says, it's woman of color for hire. And she can double as the brown face of your startup, no matter how many hours you force your engineers to sit out in the sun with their laptops. They can't get tan enough to pass for ethnically ambiguous anymore. People these days will know the difference between tan and brown, but this real woman of color will make your Silicon Beach company more diverse. Want to show off the tapestry of your personal circle to those coveted investors? She'll bring her Black, Latina, and Asian friends to your intimate meditation circle. Homemade kombucha and bindis for everyone. If she says it's okay, it's okay. That was
from McSweeney's. That's the piece that I wrote. Women of color for hire.
It's great.
Thank you.
It's great.
It was so fun to write. It just came out one night.
It's just for women of color. This is how you're detailing how we feel like we're seen, and how I often come into a room with those eyes on me, with that gaze. It's really powerful. All right, so now we're going into the Dear Laura. Dear Laura, I'm a Latina and I identify as such, and was raised by and with my Hispanic family. However, due to having light skin, I don't really experience the marginalization other women of color with darker skin experience. That said, I believe that it's important to validate one's heritage. What do you know about colorism? Is this something you've experienced?
For me?
Yeah, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So my sister is lighter skinned and I'm darker skinned. And since childhood, it's been a thing. Not in my family. My parents are incredible. They consciously made an effort to talk about how beautiful we both were, to compliment us physically all the time. And so I developed a reasonably healthy body image. But colorism is a huge thing in Pakistan specifically. And if you're white, you're beautiful. And if you're dark-skinned, you're not. My mom is a dark-skinned woman. My dad is a light-skinned Pakistani. And, you know, a lot of people have said things like, oh, like assumed, I don't know, that my mom is reaching by being with my dad when she is objectively like model status gorgeous.
Right.
And with me and my sister, when we were little, people would say things like, oh, Nuri is so beautiful, and not say anything about my appearance or comment on how smart I was or other things. And it took me a really long time to get past that. But it is really interesting because I feel like coming here, my sister has had to try harder to stay rooted in her identity. Because she is passable, she can go blonde and look blonde, at least somewhat naturally. I could never do that. It would look crazy or like a stylistic choice.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I think she as an adult has done a lot of things like taken Urdu language classes to get better at Urdu. She has gone back to Pakistan and lived there for 6 months and worked there.
She's like reclaiming her culture.
She's reclaiming her culture in ways that I feel like I never had to do and always could hold it with me.
Yeah.
I think part of that was also I was older and I had a deeper connection to our culture before I came here. And she was younger and, you know, she developed an accent and can't speak Urdu like as purely as I can or whatever. But it does change the burden that you have on yourself, and I think she wears her identity a little bit more on her sleeve. She talks more about being a Pakistani woman and a woman of color and being Muslim. She's more politically active, more of an activist than I am, because I feel like it
More
follows
than you?
me everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not at all.
No?
No. I'm not very political. I mean, maybe it comes across that way, does it?
I thought you were, but I just thought you were very
no.
conscious.
I'm conscious, but I'm not.
You're not an activist.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But she's a legit activist, you know. So I think when it comes to colorism, you know, for the writer of the letter, what's her name again?
She didn't say.
Oh, okay.
She just said she's a Latina.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think whatever you can do to be rooted in your identity and not feel guilty for it is important.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds to me, I think that's a really interesting experience, and I'm glad that I brought this up with you. It sounds to me like she's lighter and having the experience that your sister kind of grew up with, but is trying to be conscious of the other experiences of people that are also Hispanic. And, you know, being someone who's black in this country with like medium brown skin. I'm not like super light skinned. I'm not dark skinned. I feel a little bit like you did when you were growing up and you didn't realize the slights or the microaggressions. I was completely oblivious to them. But I do feel like the way I present the color of my skin, even the texture of my hair, gives me a little bit more of an in than some of my darker skinned sisters who may have more tightly coiled hair or curled hair. And that makes me angry.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the right kind of black, you know?
Yeah.
And so my choice is just to be more conscious of that when I'm in spaces where there are both, and do what I can to ensure a level playing field, if possible.
And I think it gives you a certain amount, and maybe this is not the right thing to say or not politically correct, but it does give you a responsibility.
Yes.
With passability comes responsibility,
Yeah.
right? You have to be an ambassador for your culture and your people in a certain way that only you can be, because you're going to get into rooms more easily.
Right. It's double agenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to,
Yeah.
you know, or that's how I've started to see it. I may not be light skinned, but I do feel passable, not passable, but like
Yeah.
I feel accessible
Yes.
in other ways. And I've started to take that as like, okay, this is a responsibility that will lie on my shoulders and I must use it wisely, you know?
I like that. That's what she needs to hear.
Yeah.
She has that responsibility. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions. Favorite podcasts?
Heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
How I Built This podcast.
I'm gesturing so that she doesn't know.
What? No, I would totally say it.
Heavyweight, I Built This. What else?
Heavyweight, How I Built This. My recent favorite podcast is James Kim's Moonface, which was on Time's top 10 best of list. It's a fiction podcast about an Asian man trying to come out to his mom, but they don't speak the same language.
Really? That's great.
Yeah,
That's
because
great.
she is Korean and he didn't learn Korean growing up in America, and that's a struggle. It is beautiful. It does certain things that no one has ever done before, and I'm so proud of him and proud to know him. Those are the ones that that
Like in the A rotation?
Well, I mean, Heavyweight and How I Built This, I just go back to time and time again.
Yeah.
And then Moonface was the newest one that really made a mark on me.
I
and I
haven't
felt like,
listened to that.
okay, I have something to aspire to.
Ooh.
You know?
Okay. I'll be checking it out.
You have to listen.
Yeah. Dream guests?
On a show?
Mm-hmm.
Dave Chappelle,
Yeah. That's great.
who we tried to get. I begged his manager for days.
He's tough.
Really
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
Kumail Nanjiani, who was the lead and the writer of The Big Sick.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and he's like now in all those superhero movies, and he's Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Jamila Jamil, who stars in The Good Place.
Yes.
And she talks a lot about body positivity and body image. I think those three. Those three are...
That's a good list.
And Marshall Ali, I tried to get him for Tell Them I Am also, but I know.
Love him.
I'll get to him.
And True Detective?
I mean, he's
He's
just...
transformative, right? Like,
Yeah. In every
crazy.
role.
In
It's
every
just-
role, yeah.
It's actually kind of disgusting.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's like you.
No.
You're wonderful in
Oh my God,
every
I could-
podcast. Do you so you're not politically active, but are you supporting anybody in the upcoming election?
I'm really lost. I don't know how you feel, but I don't know what is going on, and I
Yeah.
don't know what to feel. When Barack Obama ran for election, I felt a political awakening that has since gone back to sleep. And I remember, waking up at like 6 a.m. and watching the news every day. And I have every newspaper clipping and every magazine article from that time. And I donated, I was too young to vote, but I donated all of my money that I was making at Yogurtland to his campaign, which is probably really stupid. I should have saved some of it. He would have been fine either way.
You donated all of it?
I donated all of it.
That's great.
All of it. I was obsessed,
Yeah.
And I just felt like, this too is an American story. Like, this can be my story. I am like him in some ways,
Yeah.
Just could relate.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just such a heroic figure. And I know his, policies weren't always perfect, and he wasn't the perfect president, but just that campaign really caught my imagination,
Yeah.
as it did many other people's. And I have yet to see that since.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm longing for that. Maybe I'm like a pathetic little voter. I should be more informed and be, thinking more about the policies and which ones align with this and that. But I want to look up to someone, and I haven't yet seen that. So I think it'll end up being a very meticulous, tedious, intellectual decision ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan of Mayor Pete. I know not all of his policies are great, but he's fucking smart.
Yeah.
And
He's speaking here next week.
is he?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
I'll send you the
Yeah, we
the
should
link.
go.
Yeah, we should go.
Yeah,
I like to see him speak. I think he's really smart.
I learned from him.
Yeah, me too. So what's next for you are just more of the same. Like, people can go on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and find the big one. They can find Beginners. They can find Tell Them I Am. Anything else?
Yeah.
But you can't talk about
There will
that.
be more shows coming.
Yes. Okay, good.
In the new year.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. And I'll be looking forward to those. And so you're not. I do have 2 Instagram accounts because I could only find one very small like not well tended to Instagram account for you?
I only have one Instagram account.
Okay.
Misha Euceph.
No.
I just started it.
Oh, you just started it. Okay.
I just started it when
Yeah.
Tell Them I Am came out. Are we looking out at the same one? I just did a photo shoot.
Yeah, okay.
You see the photos?
No, I didn't see it. I have to look at it again.
I just
now.
started. Yeah, I just started
So
like
you're on
repopulating it. But yeah, no, it's very small. I just started it.
Okay.
Yes, I am on Instagram.
Okay,
again.
so follow Misha Euceph on at
MEUCEPH.
okay on Instagram, and you're very active on Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah, and you are on Twitter. How do they find you?
Same handle.
Same handle.
MEUCEPH. Euceph.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just check her out. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I've retweeted most of the times when she's hit a best of list. This year, for 2019, it's all the time. It's probably like every month. You are rounded up, and very well deserved. Very well deserved. I'm so glad you came in.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so glad we got to talk. And thank you for being a supporter, and
Always.
and a believer.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.